This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca, and today I am speaking with Canadian author Barbara Joan Scott, who lives and writes in Calgary, Alberta. Barbara has been in love with words her whole life, whether as a reader, writer, instructor of English literature and creative writing, freelance editor, or musician with a special affinity for lyrics. Her first book, The Quick, won the Writers Guild of Alberta, Howard O'Hagan for Best Collection of Short Fiction, and the City of Calgary W.O. Mitchell Award for Best Book. The Taste of Hunger, which we will be chatting about today, is her first novel. Barbara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So last year at Eden Mills book fair, I went and heard you speak with a group of other authors, and your book really stood out to me. And when you were talking about it, I immediately knew I had to read it. I finally did. I absolutely loved it. And so for those who have yet to read it, can you tell us a little bit about The Taste of Hunger?
Well, I always like to, I like to talk about what started the book from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, I had this idea that it was going to be very postmodern and all these intersecting stories. And I had just was fresh out of university. And then about a year before my grandmother died, she told me that she had never wanted to be married to my grandfather. And I had always assumed that they just, had the typical relationship, right? Where they were in love, then they fell out of love, and then they got a divorce. I never knew them married. They were divorced before I was born. And when she was telling me this, there was a terrible bitterness on her face. Now, she had divorced at the age of 40, and she had lived with, not married, a man 20 years her junior for 45 years. But when she told me about this, and that she was only 15 and my grandfather at the time was 29, that bitterness was still there, even all those years later. And I just thought, well, this is a terrible story. I felt really bad for her, but it didn't really connect with me until I was listening by chance to a CBC radio program. And all of these women, Slavic, I don't know if they were all Ukrainian Canadian, but they were telling the very same story, and they had the same bitterness in their voice at being denied any kind of sense of autonomy, right? Of being able to choose. So that was the first time I thought, no, I think I want to write about this. Like, how does a woman how does she bear 3 children, as my grandmother did, to a man that she obviously despised through their entire marriage? And the book was kind of my exploration of the psychological fallout of that kind of a terrible beginning. And so it is really, although it is historical, and it touches on a lot of key points of Canadian history at the time, it's basically an exploration of the psychology of that kind of a rocky start to a marriage and how it affects children and even the wider world. I mean, it really does fan out to affect quite a number of people. So.
Oh, absolutely. And, as you were saying that, in my own family, I can think of some of the women in my family who went through a similar situation. So, and my side of the family, my mom's side of the family is Hungarian. So I don't know if that's like a Eastern European kind of thing or not. I'm sure not. I'm sure it affected women of all walks of life as well from that time period, because marriages were more business dealings, right?
Yes, I think so. And especially if you were poor, you didn't have the luxury of going all kinds of places to meet somebody, the perfect person. So it was, I think, a pragmatic arrangement. And I do think that was part of a tradition for certainly in the Ukrainian tradition. And so I thought it does really, it makes a difference. A friend of mine, when I told her this story, she said, oh, well, she must have been raped every day of her life. And I thought, I don't think so. I think it was a different kind of an attitude that sex would be something that you did along with raising children and bearing children and looking after the garden, and it's a chore. But I didn't want it to be a chore, so I gave Olena a very healthy sexual appetite, and a man who really wants to please her physically, so that it wasn't so completely bleak. It wasn't like oh, the color purple, that
Yeah.
which is just appalling. I thought, oh, that poor woman. So I didn't want that to be. And my grandmother was a very strong person, so I could not put those two things together without giving her that, at least that sense that she was very in touch with her own body.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really, really good point. Now, historical fiction can sometimes, or maybe often, I don't know, romanticize the lived experience of immigrants in the New World, but your novel rings so true, and especially with regard to the lives of women and girls. So, first, can you talk a little bit about how you approached being more authentic with the way their experiences would have been? And then I'm going to ask you to read a little excerpt for from the book that I personally really I loved it, except that it's so hard
Mm.
to hear, but it really hit me like a gut punch because I felt like this is, as you said, poor women. This was their life experience for many, many poor women in that time period. So first, can you talk a little bit about just how we sort of paint historical fiction figures differently than perhaps someone like you did, where you made it more authentic?
Mm. Well, I was very lucky to come across a number of really good sources. One was Myrna Kostash's All of Baba's Children, in which she interviewed a wide number of Ukrainian immigrants who had arrived at various points. This book is maybe 40 years old. I'm not sure. So a lot of them, these were their lived experiences that they were telling her about, and it was astounding. And that was where I really got a sense of the women's lives. She interviewed a wide variety of people, so not just women, but I really got a solid sense. And then I was very lucky, and I cannot remember the name of this book, but it was a number of Ukrainian immigrants who had recorded how it was to homestead and
Ooh.
how difficult it was, so that was how I got descriptions of how you build a sod hut. And it's one of those things where you hear, oh, they built a sod hut, but when you really get a description of how it was just so. Those kinds of things were absolutely vital. And my aunt, for some of the other details of things they did that the girls did, my aunt was wonderful. So I could phone up and I could say, well, did you have dolls? And she would say, well, they made them out of these kinds of materials. And so just lovely things like that. And I think what happens with historical fiction, I'm not fond of historical fiction that shoehorns in every detail. So you do a huge amount of work, and it's painful to relinquish not 7/8 of it.
Mhm.
But then what happens is you put it deeply in your subconscious so that when you need a particular detail, it pops. And so that's what I really tried to do with the book. And some things are just like little miracles where I was trying to find details of clothing during the war years, the Second World War, and I found the Victory Red lipstick, and it was, this be patriotic, and I thought, oh my God. So I picked on it just as a little tiny detail for authenticity, and then it kind of blossomed metaphorically. So it's a very magical kind of a process to do the research and have it then become its own creative force. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So the excerpt I've asked you to read, if you can describe it just a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and let you read that for our listeners.
Okay. So I don't want to give too many spoilers, but
Yeah.
Olena, who's the mother, has had a terrible experience and has just gone to bed and stayed there. And her daughter, who is only, I think, 8 years old, 9 years old, is expected, has to take on all her chores because she has a younger daughter who needs feeding, or younger sister rather, who needs feeding. And Olena is just in that one of those deep depressive states that she barely even acknowledges the existence of her daughters. And so June, who is the oldest child, is the one who feels the need to, and the father has gone to work. And this was one of the other things that happens or happened a lot during this period of history, is that you would be homesteading, but you couldn't afford to just homestead. So the man would often go off for months at a time. And these are very remote places. So June has no way of getting in touch with anybody to tell them what terrible things her mother is going through. And so this is what she has to do. June dropped her head in her hands and cried, not for the stupid fish, but because May had complained this morning. She was tired of eating only bread and milk and eggs and whatever they could eat raw from the garden. And they had eaten almost all the bread, and June didn't think she'd be able to make more, even with instructions from Olena, who still wouldn't get out of bed. And because even though June tried to milk the cow every morning and evening, she knew from the stamping and mooing that she wasn't emptying its udder. And if the udder kept filling, it would make the cow sick, maybe even kill it. She crouched by the creek and thought of all her mother did, even when her father was home, kneading bread in a pan so large May could take a bath in it, then baking enough loaves for the week, doing the laundry in an even larger tub, rubbing the dirty clothes against a board, sweating in the steam coming from the roiling water, refilling the tub with hot water from the stove's reservoir when it cooled, filling that reservoir again with water from the well, milking the cow, bucking logs, weeding and hoeing and harvesting, then putting up the food from the garden, beans and peas, sauerkraut, which she shredded on a board fitted with a lethal blade into a huge crock, salting each layer, weighing it down with a stone on a plate, skimming the scum that burbled up from beneath. June thought of it all and was appalled. What if her mother never got up again?
Mm. That's what I'm saying, is that to think about the hardscrabble life that women historically poor women historically have had to live. It just was that long paragraph was such an eye-opener to me, and it just resonated with, like I said, my own grandmothers, that I thought of them in that same way. Anyway, so thank you for sharing that. That was an incredible passage. Thank you.
Well,
As I've said already, how much I love this book, but I think when we come across a book where there's just a large number of amazing women and girls, I just love this book particularly for that. Your female characters are absolutely unforgettable. And so I wondered if you wouldn't mind, and again, no spoilers, of course, for anybody, because there is a mystery to the story, which I loved as much as the family dynamics and that hardscrabble life. There is a fascinating mystery that goes along with this book as well. But can you say a few words about each of the female characters? And so I've kind of listed them here, of Olena, and I don't know if it's Aunt Varvara.
yeah, Vavara.
Vavara, okay. June, May, and Marie. If you could say a little bit about each of these women, because they're so uniquely different. And I felt like you just had the spectrum of womanhood and girlhood in just one novel. I just loved all of these characters
Oh,
for various different reasons, and some of them are a little harder to love than others, maybe.
yes, that is very true. Um, yeah, it's. I think that was part of it. They're so determined each in their own way to live their own lives, and they do some often very unpleasant things that. But I think we have this illusion that poor people, somehow there's this noble poverty, and I think, if people treat you really badly, the chances are pretty good you're not going to be a saint. You're going to act out in various ways. So Olena, I love her for her resistance. I think she resists even the slightest impulse to be kind to Taras, because she just cannot forgive him or her father, or even in a sense Aunt Varvara, for putting her in that situation. But I also love her earthiness and her sexuality and her connection with the land, that she goes out for these walks in the prairies and just kind of soaks that all up. So even though her life has not offered her very much, she finds what she can. June, I love, I feel very sad for June. Her time in Fort San when she gets tuberculosis is actually based on my mother's life. My mother did spend 7 years in Fort San, and she only, when she emerged, she only had 3/4 of a functioning lung. And she was told she would never walk up a flight of stairs, could never get married because she shouldn't have children. And then partly thanks to, I've forgotten the name of the drug. Anyway, it's a really important drug for tuberculosis that came up. Partly due to that. And then, of course, all kinds of other medical advancements. She had 2 children. So my mother was the kind of person, actually, kind of like Olena, who she just didn't pay attention to, don't tell me what I can do. I mean, she wasn't well for much of her life, but so that part, but June is absolutely her own person. And I just feel she's the one, I feel such sorrow for her because she bears the brunt of that terrible marriage, and she does her best to try to pull the family together and keep the family together. And then she has to look after her little pest of a sister, May,
Yep.
who I also love because May she's a pragmatist, right? And she's a survivor. And she's a little bit shallow, which I think enables her to be the survivor. She doesn't take a whole bunch of stuff to heart.
Yep.
So I just, there's a scene where she eats the egg that's supposed to be belong to June, and she doesn't. I mean, she doesn't even flash a sympathetic glance. She just enjoys. Anyway, I just fell in love with them all,
Yeah.
and Varvara. So there's no accident that Varvara and Barbara are very close, and because I look at her and I think she is like an author. She sets all of this in motion when she tells Olena, you have to marry, and you have to, and this man is not so old. She's looking at other young girls, and this was true in that interview I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
There were girls that were married off at 15 to 50-year-old men. So Varvara is very practical as well and says, this is what you need to do. And so, like an author, she can't control the fallout, that she starts this off for the best, with the best intentions, but she cannot control everything that happens after that. And then, even then, when she tries to help them by helping them move to town, that all goes sideways. So yeah,
Yeah.
I liked her. And I Marie actually was not going to be a major character. And this is kind of what happened with a lot of the characters in this book was I didn't know which ones were going to become really important. And
Mm-hmm.
so she first appeared just as this war bride. And then the more I looked at her, the more I thought, oh, she's trying to shape her own life too. She's had a life imposed on her. Like so many of these characters, their lives, whether through poverty or tradition or just circumstance, they have to fight really hard. And a number of them have to try and find that through marriage. And for all of them, they discover that's not going to be the answer. You have to have that self-reliance. And so, and then the other thing I really like about them is that each one of them gets their moment of joy. And also each one of them reaches out to another of them to help them. And
Yeah.
so even if it goes against their self-interest, sometimes there's I mean, I don't ever write from a feminist perspective, because I think, again, you have to immerse yourself so deeply in fiction. You let the people do what they need to do, and you
Mm-hmm.
try not to steer them with your own beliefs. But I do, I've experienced a great deal of kindness from women in my life. And so it was nice to be able to put that into the book as well.
I know, because one of the relationships that I loved so much was just how much June looked up to Marie, and that interaction with Marie, and I just felt like you could see her eyes just so big, and being so impressed with everything about Marie, and how exotic she seemed at the time to her. And
Mhm.
I that part just touched my heart, because so much of it was, well, I don't want to say that. I won't say so much of it, but enough of it was about, again, that hard scrabble life, and you're looking for those moments of joy, and things that make you smile and make you feel happy, and that little bit of a relationship was something I just found so precious. I loved that.
Okay, so I just want to quickly share a little Buddhist fable or parable, or I'm not sure. Anyway, because this is how I see this book. And I remember hearing about this when I was in university, and I thought, well, I was 19. I thought, well, that's just stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Now I'm older, and I think, oh. So the man is walking along, and I'm going to try and condense this. So he's walking along and a tiger comes running out of nowhere. So he jumps into the tree. And then an elephant comes along and starts fighting the tiger. And as they fight the tiger, they're shaking the ground and shaking the ground. And the man falls out of the tree and into a deep well. But luckily, there's a branch. So he grabs the branch and now he's dangling there and he's trying to figure out how he can get out when the other things are gone. And he looks down and there's a whole viper's nest at the bottom. Then he looks at the twig and the branch, and there are some mice who are busy gnawing away at it. So he's on borrowed time. And then all of the trampling on the ground above loosens a bee's hive, and it lands on his head. And now he's being stung by these bees. But a little bit of honey comes out of the hive and goes down his nose, and he sticks out his tongue and he tastes the honey. And in that moment, he's in ecstasy. And I think this is that even in, when life is very hard, it offers these moments, but the moments are so brilliant, Anyway, I love that parable.
Oh, I love that. No, oh, I don't think I'm going to forget that story now because I think when you're older, you can appreciate
Yes,
that
yes.
sentiment a little bit more. Absolutely. Now, what do you hope readers take away from this novel?
Well, actually, I think you've touched on one thing for sure. I mean, you've touched on many things, but one specific one was that I wanted not to have a hero or a heroine with a supporting cast. I really believe that every single character walks in with their own life, and so they're not, in their own minds, they are not minor characters. And so I wanted in this book to have a cast of characters, each of them insisting on their place in the world, that they have the right to be at the center of their world. And so that was very important to me. And I hope that people, I know that they do very unlikable things at times, but I really wanted people to understand why they do the things that they do. And when I first found out they were unlikable, I was absolutely shocked. A friend of mine said it, and I thought, you've got to be kidding, because I love them. I mean, I just love them. And so I'm hoping that's a takeaway. But the other really important thing is I wanted to write a literary page turner. Like, I love plot and I love character and how the two things work together to make you just want to read one more chapter. So that I'm hoping.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that I will let everyone know. Absolutely. This is a book that keeps you moving forward and wanting to find out what happens next. And like I said, that mystery as well. It was done in such a subtle way in some ways, but it was such a powerful part of the story. Absolutely amazing. So you pulled all those pieces together, and it is a page turner. So yes, I completely agree with you on that. So
Wonderful.
So thank you for all of that. But now what we'd like to do, we always ask our authors if they want to recommend any books that they've really loved. It can be something you're currently reading, something you've read in the past that you want to share, because we love to add to our TBR. And so any recommendations for our listeners?
I do. I'm at the moment, I'm really quite deeply into my own, my next novel. So reading fiction is always difficult for me when I'm doing that. But I read Maria Reva's Endling, which I thought was one of the most original books I have read in a very long time. She was longlisted for the Booker, and I think she should have been shortlisted. It's it's humorous. It starts off with this kind of marriage brokerage outfit in Ukraine, and then there's a woman who's big into snails, and she's trying to rescue this endling, which is the last of its kind. And anyway, and then there's a section where it just kind of cracks open and the author enters the book. It's a stunning achievement. So I love that. And her first book of short stories, Good Citizens Need Not Fear, was also absolutely superb. And then I was thinking about ones, because my husband and I went on a short trip a while back, and he needed some books. And so I went through my shelves and I just pulled out ones that I had absolutely loved. So another Canadian author I really, really admire is K.D. Miller. And I'm intending to reread her books. They're all brilliant, but especially Late Breaking, which is her most recent book, and All Saints, which was, I think, the one before that. They are short stories. They're often oblique, sometimes linked, but sometimes just obliquely linked. I think she should be far more famous than she is. I think she's such a brilliant writer.
I'm gonna have to ask Tara, because Tara's really good about reading widely across Canadian
Mm.
authors, and so I don't remember her ever reading Katie Miller, so I'll have to ask her about her in
Oh, yeah.
particular, yeah.
Just and she also wrote a book. Actually, my first introduction to her was a book called Holy Writ. And it was about how she became an Anglican and how her religious life and writerly life influenced one another. And I'm not a religious person, but it just made such sense to me. And that actually, so the other person I like to read, and I go back and reread like Marilyn Robinson's Gilead
Mhm.
for books, but I also love her nonfiction. She gives me hope. She's so thoughtful. She is also religious in a way that I am not. She's a Calvinist, I think. Anyway, but she is just, oh, she just gives me hope for people with such a moral center, an ethical center, and so intelligent. Like sometimes her essays leave me in the dust because they're so deeply involved with the roots of Calvinism and things like that. But other times she is just devastatingly wonderful on the state of religiosity, what she calls Christianism, as opposed to Christianity. And anyway, yeah, she's another total favorite of mine.
I'll have to check because I read Housekeeping a number of years ago, and I haven't that's the only thing I've read by her, but I didn't know she had this whole nonfiction life. How did I not know that?
Oh, and tons of them, and some of them are. And again, she was an activist. Oh, so she writes about anti-nuclear movements and things like that. But the ones I like the best. So this is What Are We Doing Here? Is a collection of essays, and if you read nothing else, you really should read the last essay, which is about how her mother, the last years of her mother's life, became just miserable thanks to watching a whole bunch of Fox News and a whole bunch of, or
Mm,
I don't know if it's the news channel but anyway, all the conspiracy theories and all the stuff that was coming out, and it ruffled the peace of what should be her peaceful last years. It was a brilliant essay, and she
yeah.
talks about, again, she's quite fascinating. She's against the grain on so many things. Like that, she argues that Calvin was actually really quite a wonderful man and not this dour person that we think he was. And anyway, she
Wow.
just gives me such pleasure. And her those four books, Gilead, Lila. Now I've forgotten the other, but anyway, those four books that are linked, like a linked novel collection, which is just boggles my mind. They're so
Yeah.
beautifully written, and again, they have that, you just get so pulled into the people. You just love the people.
Thank you for all of those suggestions. We love getting a lot, and you gave us a lot to work with. So thank you so much for that. And then my last question for you, because you kind of alluded to it. So now I'm going to ask, you said you're working on something new. So can you talk a little bit about what you're working on and when we might expect it?
Well, I'm closing in on a first, I would call it a first draft. I guess I think within the next month I'll be done my first draft.
Hmm.
And then I have a very good friend. Well, I have two very good friends that I share material with. And one of them loves me more than she loves my book, which is good because then she just says, it's brilliant, it's brilliant. And the other one, so that keeps you writing. And then the other one
Yeah.
loves books more than she loves me. And I think,
Yeah.
good, because then I show it to her and she says, well, not so. So that's been good, and it started. I can't talk about it very much, but it started in a story that I wrote, I don't know, a number of years ago, a long time ago, based on a trip that my husband and I took to Australia, and this woman was just so weird, and I couldn't. I kind of abandoned the story because it just didn't seem to be going anywhere, and then I took a look at it and I thought, why is she so weird? And then it was kind of the same thing that happened with The Taste of Hunger. Then I discovered her family, and I think, oh, they're so great. And I just fell in love with her
Oh,
brother and her weird hippie parents. And so, and that to me is the clincher. If I'm in love with the characters, then I can keep going.
yeah.
If I other and then I feel a sense of loyalty to them as well, that if I abandon them, I'm they deserve a wider life. They deserve a life outside my skull. And so that's my hope is.
Oh, I love that. I love hearing authors talk about the characters and how they are so real, and you need to express their worlds to us as readers. So I love hearing that. So, well, Barbara, thank you so much for meeting with me. And hopefully, when the new book comes out, I know it'll be a little while, but when it comes out, I'd love to have you come back and chat with us
Oh,
again.
thank you. Well, it's been just a delight. I really appreciate the invitation.
All right. Thank you. And happy reading, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.